I think we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome, welcome. We're really thrilled to have you all here, the small but mighty group interested in topics. It is early, I know, so people will filter in, I'm sure. I'm Mary Morningstar. I am a TASH National Board member. I've been on the board for about 5 years. One of the other hats that I wear is related to secondary special ed and the transition to adulthood. So I was thrilled when Barb Trader, our executive director, invited me to help organize and moderate this morning's TASH Town Hall. It is on preparing students with significant disabilities to transition to college and careers. And it's certainly an important topic in our field, and I want to make sure we've got this going. I was going to do a little setting the context, but we have so many excellent topics and issues to address. I think I would certainly keep my comments very brief. Unfortunately, they're not. We see some glimmers of positive experiences for youth with significant disabilities, but in general, they tend to be those that have the least successful post-school outcomes. They often are. While we have good high school preparation, we know the research talks specifically about high school and work-based learning. They often do not have access to those high-quality, evidence-based experiences. We also know from the research that from post-school outcomes that students who are included in general ed classes, there's predictors that they are more successful post-school in employment and post-secondary education. And again, the current research that we have around inclusion in general education, the LRE data. Yesterday I did a session with a current analysis of LRE, and students with significant disabilities are below the range in terms of the proportion in general ed versus in more segregated classroom experiences with very little change. So over 10 years, it's I don't want to say flatlined, but there's very little change in their opportunities for inclusion in general education. So we have a lot of concerns to address, and I know the panelists, the federal respondents that are here today can share with us really the strategies and interventions and the policies, research in order to promote more successful, both while students are in school and also as they move on into post-secondary education and into post-secondary employment. So I want to welcome our panel. First I'll just do a little bit on the purpose and the flow. I think I've addressed the purpose. The way this will work is we have 3 specific topics. They're questions that are related to high school preparation, extended transition services, and the role of families. We have 2 to 3 speakers per topic, so they will each come up. They'll speak for 8 minutes maximum, all of you out there. And then we will have a federal response, so each of our federal partners will respond to the topic in general. And then we have Barb McKenzie is passing out cards. She'll collect cards, and we will ask a few audience questions. The first one that occurred yesterday on inclusive education went really well, so I'm very excited about the topics and the opportunity to engage and to really think through ways to promote much more positive and successful outcomes for the individuals we are most concerned about. Our federal panel, many speak for themselves. Some I've known for longer than I care to admit. Michael Uden is the Acting Assistant Secretary at the Office of Special Education and Rehabilitation Services. He's gracefully agreed to participate, both to moderate the panel, and he carries the 2 hats of both the rehab side of things and also the school side of things. Marlene Simon Burrows is the Associate Division Director for Secondary Transition, Post-Secondary Education, Office of Special Education Services. I've known Marlene for a long time. It seems a long time. She's a lot of fun at conferences. I'll just say that. Rhonda Basha, it's a pleasure to meet you today. I'm really thrilled that we have the youth. Rhonda is a policy advisor, team lead for youth policy from the Office of Disability and Employment Policy. And so I'm really thrilled that you're here and can really speak to the activities and strategies and policies around youth leadership. And then Bob Williams, I've known Bob since 1984 at the Maryland Tash board meeting, I believe, at the University of Maryland when I was a graduate student at the University of Maryland. So I hate to admit that. I must have been really young. That's all I can say. Yeah. So Bob is currently the Associate Commissioner of the Office of Employment Support Programs. So the first topic, we'll just jump right in to the first question, which is how do we align inclusive educational experiences and school and work-based experiences to prepare students for successful transitions to college and careers? So I am really thrilled. Our first speaker is Diane Rendak. Diane is currently the chair of the Department of Special Ed at the University of North Carolina in Greensboro. And so I'm thrilled, Diane, that you're here to speak specifically to the topic of inclusive educational experiences at the secondary level. Thank you.
I'm setting my timer. Thank you for asking me to do this. I'm thrilled to be able to do this. As I thought about inclusive education and transitioning to college, careers, and the community, I was thinking that there are like 4 key variables that the research talks about and that make a huge difference in the transition outcomes. And those 4 variables include context, content, instruction, and outcomes. I have like a minute and a half for each of those topics. First, context. I'd say context matters. The research demonstrates that, and that by context, I don't just mean getting into a regular school or getting into a regular class at elementary, middle, or high school. It has to deal with the content that's provided, the person who is providing that content, the materials used, the other people who are in that context, the collaborative teaming that takes place so that everybody's needs are being met using evidence-based practices and getting also access to peers. The limited research that we have comparing the impact of context from segregated to from self-contained settings to inclusive settings is supportive of inclusive settings, even regardless of the quality of services in those inclusive settings, which is, I find, very interesting. It's limited, but it's there. And then when we look at the short-term impact of inclusion in classes, including high school settings, we're finding that our students are acquiring more academic content. They're also acquiring more alternate content, and they're also improving in their social skills and their interactions, their overall behavior and functioning within contexts, and the use of that academic content outside of the school context, in the community, on the job, and so forth. So I would say that the data is there to support inclusive settings much more. However, there's still the minimal change that Mary talked about in relation to where our students are being served, and the difference between high incidence changes and low incidence changes is pretty important, is critical. And let me stop on that. Content. There's what we're looking at in terms of content that is being taught. There's a conflict right now in the field of people who are thinking about access to general curriculum, but then also looking at the functional needs of individuals with more significant disabilities. You could think about that as functional content or foundational knowledge and skills. And the way I'm looking at the research, I think the impact of content is kind of clear. We focused on functional content for a long time, and we really have not had the outcomes that we've been looking for. So looking at the access to general education state standards, has really led to improving the progress of our students on academic content and on peer relations and in functioning and on the skills that they need to participate and the use of those in the community. However, most of the research on that is in self-contained settings. So we need to figure out how to take that out of the self-contained settings and look at those same variables, but in contexts that are much more conducive to skill acquisition and use. And then we have research also that looks at blending the content, so that we're looking at functional needs, meeting a student's functional needs within inclusive contexts, and that seems to be very promising and going in the right direction. I have to keep going very quickly here. So, but the problem that we have with content is that there's very limited change involved in the general, in terms of our students' involvement in the general education curriculum per se. I think we're getting some verbiage about it, we're getting some access to it, but when you look at schools across the board and states across the board, we're still really fighting to get our kids access to that content in the contexts that are most effective for them. And then the other part of that, I think, is happening because of teachers and administrators not having the information and questioning, why are these people, in these classrooms? And we've got to get past that somehow, whether that's teacher preparation or administrator preparation and so forth. Third area is instruction. Instruction matters. We have research that demonstrates that embedding evidence-based practices in general education activities, both instructional and non-instructional, and having access to the peers as they're getting instruction with those evidence-based practices is very effective. And yet we still have questions and we still have questions about why aren't they getting discrete training trials in controlled contexts. So looking at the research and the future research and where we need to be going to ensure that our young adults have good transition to careers in the community and college, we've got to start looking at how do we embed what we know in terms of instructional practices in contexts that prepare them for the outside world on the content that matters. And we have that in relation to explicit and implicit general education curriculum content that's focused on them, and so forth. I'm going to stop there. And yet, here's the other piece of that. And yet, I'm trying. It's right here, iPhone. And yet, very few states require universities or teacher preparation programs to prepare general education teachers and special education teachers to collaborate, to first to get what those evidence-based practices are, and then to collaborate to ensure that they're using them together within general education context so that they make sense and it's meaningful for the students with more significant disabilities in both instructional and non-instructional contexts. And I would argue that probably one of the areas that we have the least information is in relation to like vocational training programs for students in general ed and getting our students into those vocational training programs rather than setting up a separate program for them. And we also have very few states where administrators also are getting the knowledge about evidence-based practices and the needs of students with more significant disabilities. They really don't have that information. I also need to back to the teacher part because we also have some states that no longer have licensure requirements for teachers who are serving students with significant disabilities. And the initial licensure in high incidence does not include any content related to students with significant disabilities in most states. The last component I've got is outcomes. We have qualitative data that really supports everything that we're saying about inclusive education and the outcomes for adults as they're leaving. The problem that we have is more in quantitative data. While we can look at the NLTS 1 and 2 data and the SEALS data, and it gives us some information, the problem is it doesn't, oops, I'm done. The problem is it doesn't look at the quality of services, and it doesn't tell us which components make the difference in long-term outcomes. Now I'm done.
Thanks so much, Diane. It's really great. Thanks so much. Thank you. All right, so the next speaker that we have coming up is Amy Dwyer. She is from Transcend Incorporated in Rockville, Maryland. And if you have any other comments to add about, I might say that to the speakers about your background and your experiences, feel free to start with that for your 8 minutes.
Yeah. It's not worth it. I'm bringing my iPhone. That was a good idea. Hi, I'm Amy Dwyer from Transcend. I'm going to talk a little bit about work-based learning. And I think work-based learning programs are becoming more and more crucial. A lot of states are now requiring that there be work experience hours for their exit certification. And there are a lot of states that are no longer allowing transition to sheltered work after school. So work-based experiences during school are becoming very critical. Yes. So why is work-based learning so important? Work experience during school is really one of the strongest indicators of post-school success in employment. Students exit more ready to get a job. They have an idea of what work is. And then it makes the job of those adult service agencies who are receiving these young people, makes their job a lot easier when there's been experience. It provides a lot of real-world assessment. Work is different than school, and they need to understand that while they are still in school. And most importantly, it leads to outcomes. Most significantly, paid work experience while in school is the most compelling predictor of post-school outcomes. And so when developing work-based learning programs, there's school systems out there now saying, okay, we really see the importance of this. How do we develop a strong work-based learning program? And I always say it needs to be very purposeful. It's not like, okay, we just have to put kids out in the community, get them out of high school. That's not going to lead to the outcomes. It needs to be very purposeful. There are goals for work-based learning. It is discovery for the student is really key. They need to figure out what are they good at, what do they like to do, and where can I do that, where I fit in. At the same time, for those transition personnel, it is very important for them to get assessments of their students while out in the real world. It gives students exposure to the real world. It also gives employers exposure to the youth to see what talent is coming out of the schools. That's the future workforce. So employers need to be partners earlier, and then schools can get feedback from employers. What else do we need to do? What other skills do we need to work on while in school? Because ultimately that's a school's job, is to prepare the future workforce. So, forcing those business partnerships earlier is only a good thing. And then it makes it easier to get those students paid work in their final year of high school. And I'm going to say that again. Ideally, the ultimate goal of every work-based learning program is to get students paid jobs, paid by the employer, in their final year of high school. And too often, I think school systems feel like their job, their responsibility is the pre-employment training, and that they're going to leave the paid work to wherever they're going to next. And unfortunately, there are some pitfalls in that, because then there's, delays in funding, there's no communication. Students end up sitting at home on mom's couch. They're losing a lot of that crucial stuff that they've learned, and now we're doing catch up and starting over. So I think that's a real problem. What are some of the benefits of work-based learning to students? Obviously, they're starting their career discovery, and I think that's important to do it out in the real world, not just read about it. Learn which of their accommodations and supports work on the job, because you have accommodations that work at school, accommodations that work at home. They can be different because they have to fit into a work environment. You have to figure that stuff out earlier. It helps for their self-advocacy skills later and asking for supports too. They need to understand what are work expectations versus being in high school. It's very different. And it links classroom learning to work, that learning to earning, especially strong in some of those post-secondary programs that I've done a lot of work in, where a kid wants to work in childcare and they take child development courses and first aid, and suddenly they are much more marketable to that industry, and they make that connection. One of the models that we have worked on in Maryland and in other states are picking up on to try to ease that gap that occurs from that final year of school into work is to bring in the VR and DD agencies while kids are still in school. That way, you have somebody coming in and working from the adult side with someone in their final year working on paid work, so that the last day of school looks no different than the day after they graduate. They have a job, it's paid, it's being supported, and they know who's supporting them. And we don't have that gap of sitting on mom's couch, which happens. So what should a work-based learning program include? It should include strong discovery, because for a lot of kids, this is the first time they're about to enter a career and get to know the world of work. So they're figuring out what they like to do and what kind of environment they like to work in. Now's the time to do that. It gives them exploration, it gives them trial and error, which we want kids to do trial and error while they're still getting support from us. That's the safest way to make errors. It's the real world. There needs to be meaningful experiences. So again, these need to be time limited. I've seen work-based learning programs where, they're there for the whole semester, and then beyond. The goals are very specific. Find out what you like to do, learn something, and then that should determine what your next experience is. So if they're meaningful, each experience guides where they go next. That doesn't mean we have 10 spots and everybody rotates through them, because that doesn't mean that what you found out in one is leading to the next outcome. So they really, again, need to be very, very purposeful. How much time do I have? I have 2 minutes, okay. I didn't even look at it. I brought it up and didn't look at it. So what are the factors that are really necessary for effective and purposeful work-based learning? You need to have structures within the school system that support meaningful experiences. So you have to have trained professionals. There needs to be transition people who understand marketing and know how to approach businesses and have the time and flexibility to do that. When you have transition personnel who also are running 3 classes and are the case manager, and they can leave the building maybe from 12 to 12:30, you're not going to be able to connect with a lot of businesses. It just doesn't support that. You need to have school coursework that's tied to the career experiences so that students can see the connection to what I'm learning means I'm going to have a better job. And transportation, and I'm just going to say that. I can never solve anybody's transportation problems, but it always is an issue, and it's an issue in work-based learning. The processes that support meaning must include systematic career assessment and discovery. Discovery is so important for anybody looking for a job, but particularly kids looking for their first job and entering the world of careers. Their discovery is really important, and the individuals working with them, as you're going to give that information on to adult services, that discovery needs to be really good and strong. There needs to be soft skills training, which you can't do in the high school, because the high school world is very different than the real world. So it needs to happen where it's going to happen. And then really good, strong support and follow along by trained professionals. So I think that those are really key factors in effective work-based learning. But again, work-based learning needs to be purposeful and have solid goals. So, thank you.
And just to mix it up a little bit, I did move Barb Guy, who is the Director of Special Education for the Iowa Department of Education, into this session because she's going to be talking specifically about high school issues. Again, I hate to tell my age, but I've known Barb. We were doctoral students together at the University of Kansas and have known each other for a long time in terms of transition, and so I'm thrilled that she's here representing the great state of Iowa. Thanks, Barb.
Thanks, Mary. So I am going to go pretty quickly. I have 4 points I'd like to make. Obviously, we all have to move quickly. And I'm not sure how much you all are interested in, know about, or care about something called the SSIP, which is the State Identified or Systemic Plan. Didn't even
It's
have that.
systemic improvement
Thank you.
plan.
I got a
cannot-
little nervous. And then you throw the simmer in there. So what I'm going to tell you is I'm going to use these acronyms, SIP and simmer, which I can't even tell you what they mean, and not take the time to explain a lot of depth behind them. But I will be here after the session, so if you want to go further into what the heck did you just say about that, please see me. So the 4 points, just starting, I think I want to applaud OSEP for taking this approach to move to differentiated accountability, to look at and set up a system for states and districts that's based on the results of learners, the effect of what we do is absolutely the right way to go. It is absolutely the correct way to go. Unfortunately, we're still growing it, and I appreciate and applaud the fact that we're not going to get it perfect before we start implementing it. I think the approach that you're taking in terms of partnering with states to say, let's figure this out together, is refreshing and hopeful. Gives me lots of hope. There's the good stuff. If for those of you who have lived in the land of indicators, in Part B, there is something, Indicator 13, which is appropriately numbered as the percent, and it reflects the percent of IEPs that address the transitional requirements of IDEA. And it is, in my opinion, the only measure that is our first attempt to bridge that step between compliance and outcome, because it is the first measure, I think, that we're looking at and making judgments around the appropriateness of the decision made by the IEP team, because we are looking at everything, how everything connects together, and it is, I think, one of our most powerful measures if we measure it accurately. Unfortunately, every state measures it differently. Iowa has taken, and a handful of states have taken a pretty strong approach to saying you have to have everything in there, and if it doesn't align, then you're not going to pass this measure. For example, if you have somebody who wants to go to a 4-year college after school, after high school, and they've been in a modified curriculum all their lives, we would not pass that for Indicator 13 unless there was something in there saying, you need to take these courses, and gives a plan for how we're going to move you from a modified curriculum into a highly rigorous program so that you can go straight to a 4-year college. Now, there are lots of other options, but we would look at those kinds of things. And as a result, in Iowa, we started at 5% of our IEPs meeting compliance, and we are going to report to the feds this year that we are at 87% now, which is great, true growth for all the districts in our state. And it's one of the only initiatives we have in the history of our department that we have every high school represented a number of times. But yet, with that growth, true growth, we will be a state in needs of assistance probably 3 years now. So that approach to the results of being penalized for real growth is not an incentive for doing it right. So there's point one. The other piece, or part of that thing about working towards the right measures if we're going to go to differentiated accountability is, I believe, B14, which is a performance measure right now. It's what's happening after you get out of school. What are kids doing for employment and post-secondary education, or if they're not doing those, where are they? It's a great measure. Again, I think, however, that it should be within the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, and it should be required for all students, not just kids with disabilities. And I'm only halfway through, and I'm on point one. Just to add to that, we do collect data for both kids with and without disabilities in our state, and it is remarkable what that comparison means, especially as you incorporate it into a school accountability and improvement program. Just a quick point number 2 that links to that. Most states, as they're approaching the differentiated accountability, they're using the tiered model. So our hope is that 80% of our districts would perform at a certain level, so that they would get basically a cursory review of anything deeper, because they're having good results, so that we can focus 20% of our efforts and resources on those districts that are struggling to have good results. And what could happen if we don't have the right measures for that first review, the first screening, we will have districts that are overlooked, or that may have a building that isn't performing well. So we need to really look at that closely so that we're making sure that every district, every building gets reviewed every year. My third point is that the Elementary and Secondary Education Act and IDEA should not be in conflict around graduation and maximum age of services. Right now, I believe that's a federal issue, not a state issue. It shouldn't be left to states to decide that, because if you don't have a waiver, which our state doesn't, that affects our ability to change that piece. Plus, our partners in general education, they don't want to make ripples with Title I or with their AYP determination. So I think that's a federal piece, and I think it should be within the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. But I also think what goes with that, and something that we're not really attentive to for especially those kids who have really significant complex needs, that means there's no guarantee about how long you're in school. We're actually looking at, you're not in till maximum age because you have a significant disability. That we're looking at the course of study for each individual and setting up the services that are necessary so they have the entry-level skills for that next environment. And we don't keep kids in schools because the other outside agencies don't start services till they're 21. So that means we have to partner with those agencies so that everything is tailored around the student and not about what resources we have available. And my last point then is, as we move and talk about this, the State Systemic Improvement Plan, which is our SIP there, I wanted to make sure I got my points back, is a great opportunity for us. It is a great opportunity for us to talk about one system from Part C, birth. From the moment you enter this system, we are going to work and work hard so that you can exit the system at any point, but also you graduate ready for college and career. That is a great opportunity. It's been, I think, a message some people have carried for a while, but it's been mixed messages, and it should be the only message we carry. And I think, so if you're working on academics, you're working on those academics because we're working to get you prepared for college and career. College being a very broad definition. And that way, therefore, when we talk about the SIMR, the State Identified Measurable Result, we are being counseled and advised to take something that's very specific that we can show, basically that's ready to scale up so we can show results on it. So when we talk about that, we have to talk about it in the big picture of the improvement plan, because otherwise, once again, it looks like we're pushing a fragmented initiative, that all we care about is whatever that state selects. So it's very important that we talk about it in the whole process and not just the little piece of it.
It's so wonderful to hear such important topics. I know 3 seems like a lot. I was sort of a little bit on overload in terms of each of those really essential topics. We have about 15 minutes now for the federal panel to respond. And Michael, you might start with this one, and then maybe we'll move to Marlene, and then Bob and Rhonda can respond.
Absolutely. So I'll just a couple of quick remarks because folks have a lot to say. That was great. That was really important information. As folks know, right, 4 out of 5 kids with disabilities say their primary goal when they leave high school is to go to college as their non-disabled peers. 4 out of 5 kids want to go to college. We also know that less than 10% of kids with disabilities in this country are proficient in reading and math at 8th grade on NAEP. We can look at state data, we can look at NAEP data, and we know that our kids are not being prepared. The overwhelming majority of kids with IEPs in this country are not performing at a level that is sufficient to prepare them academically for success in college and career. You know, so Bob talked about results-driven accountability. We're looking at changing the way we support states to really begin focusing on outcomes. Compliance is critically important. It's just not enough. We got to also look at how kids are doing. It's not enough to say that you've submitted timely data, right, or accurate data. How are your kids doing? Are they being prepared sufficiently to be successful? So there's great stuff going on. We can talk about that after. Just a couple of things. Research, research clearly shows that the more time kids spend in the general ed contexts, as Diane talked about in the beginning, right? The more time kids with disabilities spend in the general ed context, the better they do in reading and math. We know how important inclusion is. We know that it's more than just the term inclusion. It means access to a general curriculum in a general classroom with a general ed teacher, and the supports and the supports that are necessary for the kid to be successful. There's no question about it. Kids can't learn the content if they don't have access to the content, plain and simple. So we've got to get them access to the content. And research shows, right, struggling learners with disabilities can succeed at grade level content with appropriate instruction, with high quality instruction and the right kinds of supports. So we know this. We know this is possible. We know this is doable. And it's not just me, it's research. Right? One thing to note, there's a great resource that we fund called the National Center for Intensive Interventions that provides support to states and districts and educators around kids with persistent and severe academic and behavioral needs. So they're working with, all right, how do you individualize instruction as you move up the tiers in RTI or PBIS? How do you provide those supports in a general ed context for all kids, but those with persistent and severe academic and behavioral learning needs? So it's a resource. IntensiveIntervention.org is the website if you want to take a look. One more quick thing, work-based learning, key. Research shows it. We all know it. The newly enacted WIOA Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act provides an incredible opportunity to collaborate and coordinate and strengthen our systems. It is the expectation of the United States Congress, it is the expectation of us at the Department of Education that our VR agencies work with, coordinate with, strengthen their systems so everybody has a real clear understanding of who's responsible for what, that we don't have that break in service that we talked about, right? That everybody knows what their responsibilities are. And then one thing, and I don't know if Marlene's going to talk about it, but we have making sure that as we move forward with transition, that transition services are available in the least restrictive environment, that we have dual enrollment opportunities, and there's so much more. So I'm going to stop there because I know folks have it.
Great.
And I'll
Thank
turn it
you
over
so
to
much.
Marlene.
It's really important.
Yeah.
Good morning. This is such an important discussion. I'm very glad to be here. I want to just touch on a little bit what Diane was talking about in terms of access to the general education curriculum, or basically inclusion in academic classes. We have at the Office of Special Education Programs a fairly extensive technical assistance network that's designed to work with states, school districts, schools, parents around multiple issues. And we've really worked to focus our technical assistance efforts in ways that support schools to deliver on inclusive general education for all students, including those students who have extensive support needs. We want to move schools toward operating as fully integrated organizations that discourage that sort of silo approach. When a multi-tiered system of supports is used and more intensive interventions are designed for either academic or behavioral needs, students can receive them in addition to the general ed curriculum that's offered to everyone else. And that really does help with the inclusion in academic classes. So we do fund, in addition to the Intensive Intervention Center, there's another technical assistance center called SWIFT, and it is a kindergarten through 8th grade technical assistance center that is designed to provide academic and behavioral support to promote learning and academic achievement of all students, including those with the most extensive support needs. And it's not necessarily in secondary schools. However, what they're doing and what's on their website is really universal, and we certainly want to learn from what that center is learning and doing, particularly in middle schools. I think we'll have some applicability for secondary schools. And that website is swiftschools.org, just plain SWIFTSCHOOLS.org. And then with regard to work-based learning experiences, I have to echo what's been said by Amy and Michael on the importance of work-based learning. One of the things that we've done has been to jointly fund between the Office of Special Education Programs and the Rehabilitation Services Administration a large technical assistance center that's going to assist state education agencies, local education agencies, state VR agencies, and other VR service providers to implement evidence-based and promising practices and strategies for students with disabilities, including students with significant disabilities, to ensure that they graduate from high school with knowledge and skills and supports needed for success in post-secondary education and employment. And that is a nice collaboration. Some of the folks that you probably are well aware of out in the field that are doing that work, people at the University of North Carolina, Charlotte, folks, David Tess and others, folks at the University of Oregon, Deanne Unruh and others, Western Michigan University, Paula Kohler, and University of Kansas, Mary Morningstar, and Transcend, Rich Luking, and who will be speaking to you later. Also, the folks that were part of the National Dropout Prevention Center, Lugina Bost, Matt Clare, are also going to join UNC Charlotte in that work. So we've got a nice cross-cutting group of folks that are going to be doing that technical assistance work that's going to be very helpful. One other thing is the OSEP in a past couple years ago, 2012, issued a guidance. It's called the Spitzer-Resnick. It's to Jeffrey Spitzer-Resnick, Beth Swindon, and Lisa Pugh from Disability Rights Wisconsin. And basically the response to them outlines and clarifies work-based placements for students with disabilities. And it clarifies the fact that those placements also are subject to the least restrictive environment provisions in IDEA. Just because these are students who are being served under IDEA, they still have to be served in the least restrictive environment. And I think that's been very helpful to the field. Let's see, ESIP. I think this is the opportunity to really talk about one of our significant investments, which is the National Center on Systemic Improvement. And it is a very large, probably our largest technical assistance center that we've ever funded, that is going to be assisting states and school districts with implementing SIP plans that Barb was talking about. So there'll be a lot of technical assistance that's really focused on this effort.
Thank you, Marlene. Bob Williams.
Good morning. Having grown up, especially at the start of my career and serving as an officer of TASH in the 80s, when I was 10, by the way, it is great to be home again. Just so you know, I prepared my remarks based on material and draft talking points prepared by some of the presenters. So, my disclaimer is, if I am redundant or miss the boat entirely, the responsibility is all mine. Before commenting on the first topic, there is one overall concern I want to highlight based on what I reviewed, which is that one of the descriptions of this session is that its focus is improving extended transition supports and outcomes for young people with significant disabilities ages 18 to 21. And I recognize there are logical and compelling policy, funding, as well as pedagogical reasons for putting those age boundaries around this discussion. The plea I frequently make, however, is that whenever we are working on improving the lifetime career path employment, economic, health and wellness outcomes and successes of any and all young people, of any and all people, period. That what we call transition to adulthood is something called living life. Having been one, I feel quite passionately that for young people with significant disabilities to succeed in graduating from high school, in going to college or other career development training, in gaining and sustaining good, upwardly mobile jobs and careers that can lead to better self-supporting futures, all the academic and what I think of as the moral education and declaration that builds the foundation needs to take place early and often, continually. In fact, I grew up in the 60s and 70s, and while my parents never smoked cigarettes, much less anything else, they were inhaling something rare. Because I do not remember a time when going to college and being successful was not something they talked about or expected, both of and for me. So academics are extremely important from the get-go, right on through. And we need to use the stress on enable students with significant disabilities, including those with the most significant disabilities, to teach and expect resilience, pride, and mastery, and to create what behavioral economics researchers call a new choice architecture, or a decision-making framework that enables kids, their parents, friends, and teachers cut through the complexity and the harsh bigotry of no expectations to see and understand what opportunities truly are available and what pathways and life choices they can pursue that will give them. Nor the guarantee, but a fair and damn good shot at succeeding in life, in a good life, and in earning fully or substantially a decent living.
Thank you, Bob. That was really important. Thank you so much. And Rhonda, your responses?
Good morning. I would say two things. One is we have to start beginning with the end in mind through the development of employment first strategies if your state doesn't already have one. If we have the expectation from the beginning that integrated employment is where we're going, we're more likely to get there. I also would say that there is another tool that is out there to people that you may or may not be aware of, individualized learning plans. Individualized learning plans are something that's not required at the federal level. They're a state initiative or executive order initiative. 38 states are currently using them, and they provide another mechanism which allows for, when they're implemented correctly, whole school involvement, general and special education teachers. Everybody owns it. And unlike an IEP where it's typically looked at once or twice a year, it tends to be more of an ongoing, weekly part of what is part of the school day. And this offers another opportunity for people to identify through discovery what they like to do, and then to make, as a result of that, get a better sense of what needs to be done to get there, and to engage more in the process of and understanding why they're learning what they're learning. We know that the career tech folks have organized the world into career clusters, and there are 16 of them. And we know that there are tons and tons of occupations within those career clusters that people can do, and regardless of whether somebody has significant disability or not, there are careers within those clusters, and it's not up to us to say whether a career is realistic or not. It's up to the individual. And I would say two other things regarding work-based experiences. Another framework that we have developed, the Guidepost for Transition Success, has been shown to be effective in designing programs and policies related to serving all populations. Rich Luking recently did a study. You could ask him a little bit about his study that has shown this to be the fact, and that provides something else that you can think about as you're organizing your policies and practices to better support young people in attaining positive transition outcomes. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much to the federal panel. My name's Heather Alcock. I'm a member of the Inclusive Education Committee, and I also work in the area of transition. And we have a couple of questions from the audience we'd like to pose to the panel. The first question is, how do local and state policies that require passing a state exam in order to get a regular high school diploma limit students' post-secondary ed options?
So I can take that. I mean, there are some, without doubt, there are some very real tensions and conflicts. And, you know, high stakes exit exams pose a set of challenges. Without question, they pose a very significant set of challenges, or can, for certain kids. To me, the challenge, why I say is a tension, is because we need to have high expectations. We need to set high standards. If we set low standards, that's what they're going to get, right? I mean, like, again, 40 years of research shows kids with disabilities do better when they are held to high standards. So, and access to the general curriculum. And if we start carving out exceptions or exclusions or modifications, we drive trucks through that and we lower expectations. We know that from all the years of research that shows that teachers' expectations have an impact on student learning. So if a teacher's saying, you know what, these kids don't need to learn that, they're fine right here with this, lower or modified standard. They ain't ever getting out of that. So we know from our experience with the modified assessment, the 2% rule, right? We know from experience, from data, that there are states in this country that are creating this segregated track for kids, and they're graduating from high school, and they can't read. I said this the other night when I was talking, right? I mean, there are states where 50, 60% of kids with IEPs are in a modified track. That just can't be. So this is a real tension. There's no easy answer here. But once we start lowering expectations and setting alternate and lower standards and don't expect kids with significant disabilities or kids with disabilities at all to go on and be successful in post-secondary life and college and career, then we've made a mistake. So.
Okay. All right, we have another question, and we're going to direct this towards Marlene and Rhonda. Is it work experience during school or while in school? Isn't it important to be part of and learning in the academic classes and work after school or summers? Important to be part of the school community, get career ideas from clubs, etc.
I think that's correct. It's very important that students with disabilities, all students, be part of the whole school curriculum and included in the whole general education curriculum. One of the things that I've noticed over a fairly long career in special education is that over time, the general education curriculum has become more able to provide vocational and career-related instruction within the general ed curriculum, and it kind of ebbs and flows. And I think we kind of, I guess they say the pendulum swings too far one direction and swings back the other. Too much of an emphasis on strictly academic instruction in the general ed curriculum and less of an emphasis on career-related instruction. So now we're talking about college and career ready. We're saying that a lot. And my hope is, as we continue to push forward as a field, that will make the general education curriculum something that all students can also achieve work-based learning activities during the school day, after school, and also receive the academic instruction in the general education curriculum.
And that actually is what is allowed through ILPs now in states where it's been implemented in that way. So in some places we're starting to see that sort of thing. I think what we really need to be careful about, though, and this, because I know that this happens very frequently, is that we think of our kids as needing all this extra academic help, and that therefore they don't have the time to engage in these work-based experiences after school. And that research tells us just the opposite. They need to do that. In fact, I would argue that work-based experience should be written in every single person's IEP from the time they are old enough to work.
Okay, great.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And we're actually on time, which is really wonderful. And in order to stay on time and to get to all the essential content and questions, one thing I might ask, I realized, if you have a question and if it's for a specific panelist, be sure to put that on your question. So that would be helpful to all of us. Okay, so what we're going to do now is move on to question number 2, and this is really targeting how do we extend what we know works in high school and ensure that the supports are there to support young adults with significant disabilities as they move into college and career readiness. And we do have 2 speakers coming up, the first of which is Rich Luking from Transcend, a longtime colleague and friend. And Rich, I don't know if you remember this, but when Transcend first started, I think your first student that you placed in supported employment was one of my students from Walt Whitman High School. So we go way back, way back. So thank you.
Yeah, you're always way ahead of the curve, Mary. That was many, many years ago, I hate to say. Yeah, thank you. I'm going to do 3 things in my short time, and I have a watch. How old school is that? Okay, so I want to talk about what is the ideal in making work readiness and work transition. Why is it possible? Why is this ideal possible? And what does it take? The third thing is, what does it take to reach this ideal? So the ideal is this. It was already alluded to by my colleague Amy Dwyer, is that a student seamlessly transitions from school to adult employment in a way that the day before school looks the same as the day after school. In other words, the student already has a job that's targeted for longer-term employment, and that the supports are in place to sustain success in that job and ongoing career advancement. So we call that seamless transition. And that ideal is more of the exception than the rule, as many of you already know. And so what can we do to make that more the rule and rather than the exception? So if we believe that every youth should have the opportunity to work, in other words, we presume they're employable, and by employable we mean employed in a integrated job in the community where they're paid at least minimum wage, where they are working alongside of other workers who do not have a disability, and where they are working in the context of an authentic workplace. So that's the ideal. Now we can talk about college and careers as well. I'm going to target just the work part because the college part's already been discussed by others. So why is this? But even though this isn't the norm, why is it possible? Well, we know, as Amy mentioned before, that if youth have these work experiences, other people have mentioned this, they're more likely to work as adults. We also know that the possibility of having adult employment goes way up if there is not only that chance to have work experience and a real job in high school, but when there's also collaborators there working with the schools to sustain that work success. So we know that many, many people with significant disabilities require that ongoing support in order to achieve and maintain employment. That's what we know. Here's what it takes, though, and here's where we kind of run into a bit of a roadblock at times. Not only should it takes really all of the collaborators to presume employability for the youth. In other words, not only the teachers who are working with the students, it should also be the VR counselors who might open cases on behalf of that student. It might be the vocational rehabilitation vendors who might provide employment services pre or post school exit. It also means the families believe it, and it also means the individuals themselves have that presumption. Now, that, as we know, unfortunately is not always the case. And so we can promote that, however, if we can continue to show folks what's possible. So early linkages is important. It's been mentioned by other folks. And by linkages, we don't just mean a handoff. In other words, we know how it works, where a student hands it off to VR, or VR hands it off to a service provider, or somebody hands it off to a developmental disability service system, for example, and say, now it's your turn, good luck. But when all of those entities are working together and collaborate together on behalf of an outcome, not just a handoff, but an outcome, we find that we can expect more. So Rhonda mentioned the guideposts that have been one set of evidence gathered that suggests optimal transition services. One of those guideposts is systems linkages. And so the question is, how do we link those systems so that they're all working for the same outcome? So one of the things we've seen is that if vocational rehabilitation opens a case at least 2 years prior to expected exit, if the school system is able to help youth gain those work experiences that were discussed before, and if in the last year of school that student is in a real job that's targeted for post-school experience, and if there's a service provider working with the schools and with VR to be able to provide the on-the-job support that they would need to be successful in the job and maintain and sustain their employment success, and if there is the supports in place to continue that support once they leave school, and the families believe that that should happen, and the youth believes it should happen for themselves, then it happens. Now, that's a lot of moving parts to make this work. But we're finding that when they're all on the same page and they collaborate for that outcome, it happens. So Rhonda mentioned some research we've done. We've actually just finished a study that shows that when those things happen that I just mentioned, all of those pieces in place, that first of all, youth are twice as likely to be employed as youth who don't have those things in place. We also find out that vocational rehabilitation is twice as likely to have a successful rehabilitation closure for the student for whom they've opened the case than students who don't have those things in place. Speaking of what's in it for everybody, that's a major thing. If I'm a rehab counselor and I open a case on somebody that's twice as likely to be successful and my system's going to get credit for it, I'm right there to help make that happen. So instead of saying, geez, I don't know if that person can be employed, they're saying, how can we help to make that happen so that we can have that kind of success with folks? We also know that those, speaking of another guidepost, which is career preparation, connected with work experiences, we also know then that schools get credit for their indicator 14 outcomes if a year after they exit school they're working. So you see where I'm going with this. When the systems have something in it for them that shows that they're going to get some outcomes and get credit for it, they're more likely to collaborate. In the end, it's the seamless transition that they're all working for. And so we have the knowledge, we have the experience, we have the strategies, we have the ability at this point to make a seamless transition happen. So the next question is, how can we make that put policies in place to make that the norm rather than the exception? And it was mentioned, just the last point I'll make, about the Workforce Innovation Opportunities Act, a major step forward in federal policy to recognize that this kind of collaboration is really, really important and really effective. And so as we see more policies in place that not only support but also sort of require these kinds of collaborations, we're going to see more of that, the kinds of outcomes that we think are possible. Thanks.
He finished a little early. I wasn't ready. Thanks, Rich, so much. That's right. That's right. I actually got a text in the middle of that was the problem. Woo. So next up we have, this is a really exciting pair that are coming up. Becky Garland and her son David Manley are coming up to talk specifically about their experiences in supporting David to transition from high school into post-secondary education. So thank you very much.
Good morning. And I'm going to set my timer. Let's see if I can use this technology on the smartphone. Okay, this is David Manley. He is my son, and I wanted him to speak first so that he has plenty of time. We're going to talk about his transition from high school into his community following college. And the best way to assist with this is to use a visual aid. So, as you can see, David has had a vision for his life since probably birth. He's very goal-oriented and goal-directed. And so, David, I'm going to ask you a few questions about your vision, okay? When you graduated from high school, you wanted to do something. Where did you want to go?
May go to WCU with David Wesley.
Yeah, he wanted to go to Western Carolina University. They had a new program called the University Participant Program, and so David applied and he wanted to go because David has a vision, don't you? What kind of job did you want to get?
Get a job at Graham County with Larry and Missy and me. My school, my work is job first, clean first, but up my place, on the road, a job at AMAS, job, a big word is AMAS job, a job, paramedics, and MT and paramedics, and help people sick and hurt and wrecks, and talk about right here about Tash right now. MAS guys help me sick and hurt and help people.
Right. And so
job.
You wanted to work with ambulances and paramedics, and so you got a job, didn't you? Because of your experience at Western Carolina University, you were able to get good job experience, weren't you? And after you got your job, you said you wanted to live somewhere. Where do you want to live? What's on this shirt?
Shirt lived at mine Garner Road, Sweetwater, Graham County. Live up there. My Papa Ray, the Gordon spot, log cabin, and a big word is log cabin. My left, finished my permit. On by myself.
Live on your own.
And
what do you want to drive?
We're going to drive Ed
right.
first.
What do you want to drive?
And get my license, get a truck.
Get a truck. And what are you going to have in your truck?
dog box.
A dog box for what?
Uh,
Hound dog.
a hunt with Coon, a hunt with Billy Max and me, going coon hunt.
Gonna go coon hunting. That's right. That's right. So you're gonna have a dog, aren't you? A hound
And
dog.
Miss Side for a hunt with Billy, Uncle Bill, and dog. This dog name is a boy, and a coon hunt.
So wonderful. Thank you, David. And so David just recently moved into his own apartment while we're raising money for the cabin. And so we're selling T-shirts. And doing lots of other things.
I want to money, so.
Lots of money. As you can see, David's very goal-oriented. He knows what he wants in life. When he was in school, we did inclusion because I was convinced that in an inclusive atmosphere, David would be able to thrive better and learn better. And so he did go to college. The transition plan for him in high school was go directly to the workshop, do not stay in your community, and do not make above minimum wage. But David had a different vision, and that was go to college, go directly to college. I will live in my community, and I will make more than 25 cents an hour. David is today a contributor to his community. Because he lives in his own apartment and because he works a community job, he saves the state of North Carolina over $100,000 a year in Medicaid funding. And he is going to be in an apartment with a monitoring system that's going to save the state another $40,000 a year in supports. Barb Trader has trained me over the last couple of years very well. And she has trained me to always go directly to the big ask. And the big ask is, number one, that the federal government and the state governments would see that cyclical dependency does not work, and that we need policy changes so that persons like David can live independently and not have to depend on programs that are going to force him into poverty. The second ask is that funding for TIPSIDS, post-secondary ed, be maintained and increased. It's because of a 5-year grant from the Department of Ed that David was able to go to Western Carolina University, and that has changed more than the lives of David and his cohorts, but it also changes perceptions of future educators, future professionals, future employers. As they are peer supports, they learn the value of a person with an intellectual or other disabilities, and they're more willing to hire them, and they're more willing to create inclusive settings in the school system. And the third ask is for funding for better transitioning within, from kindergarten forward. Parents should be educated in early intervention that college is an option, and the college should be a must from the time that they're babies. And greater accountability mechanisms to ensure that educators on the ground level understand what least restrictive is. And what appropriate truly is. So I'm going to say this, David is very goal-oriented, but there should be more and more Davids and less kids languishing in workshops and in self-contained settings. We really appreciate the opportunity to tell our story this morning. If you want to know more about David's story, you can go to room number 19 at 11:30, and you'll see what impact David is having on his workplace culture and on his community as a whole. And we're done. Thank you.
Really awesome. Sorry, Rich. That kind of trumps you.
At least you didn't have to go after that, though.
That's right. That's right. That's a good point. That's a good point. So, Bob, how about if we start with you in terms of responding to extending transition services, high expectations for both career and college settings for individuals?
From the research, as well as my own experience and that of other friends and colleagues, with and without disabilities, it is clear that working and developing the habits and a strong ethic and pride in working hard, perhaps meeting with some failure, but learning from it to persevere, when once again done early and often enough, can have tremendous equalizing effects in terms of nudging kids forward, teaching that there is dignity in both risk and failure, as well as in succeeding, and generally broadening their horizons, their sense of what is readily achievable if they extend themselves in ways that, frankly, most others don't especially expect or want them to do. This needs to begin, from my perspective, as early as elementary school and certainly by middle school. Most of us learn to work hard from fairly early on and in multiple ways in life. We did chores. I was great at putting canned goods in the kitchen cabinet under the sink. We engaged in sports. We had paper routes. And hopefully we studied hard, especially in our best classes, long before high school, all of which creates the basis for the kind of positive choice architecture I referenced earlier. Let me briefly touch on we at SSA can and are eager to partner with all of you to increase and improve on the opportunities and supports that young people on SSI have to gain the real work experience they need beginning in high school. There are three things in particular I think are of value. The first of which is we have two high schools, both in California, which have been fairly successful ticket-to-work employment networks for some time now. Richard Rosenberg from the Whittaker High School and is a long-time TASH leader and hopefully lurking about here somewhere, is pivotal to this innovative approach and a good resource you can reach out to. Similarly, organizations like Transcend, ahead in Pennsylvania, and the USAID in West Virginia, as well as several project search sites, too, and others across the country, are doing some great work on increasing internship and other work experiences with and for young adults on SSI, and receiving ticket payments for doing so. I am the first to stress that these payments should not be relied on as a sole source of funding, but because these payments are tied to helping individuals achieve and sustain key employment objectives, they are a great source of gap-filling and flexible funding. Secondly, the Work Incentives Planning and Assistance, or WIPA projects we fund, can advise young people age 14 and older on how to use key work incentives, like the student earned income exemption, to take part in internships, summer jobs, or other paid work experiences, and earn up to $6,000 a year without it affecting their benefits. It is a great and also very underused. The last thing I want to flag and provide detail on later is we also have completed a multi-state random design youth transition demonstration, which has yielded some important insights.
Great, thank you very much. Rhonda, maybe you could respond next.
First of all, I'd like to say congratulations to David for having a vision and goal and not letting anybody get in your way, and to David's mother for not listening to people who try to dissuade her and have him take another route. We do need additional funding for programs like the program that David has been in, and we are also working more generally to try to increase the capacity in community colleges to be able to better include youth with disabilities, including those with significant disabilities. This past October, the Office of Disability Employment Policy awarded funding to Pellissippi in Knoxville, Tennessee Community College and to Onondaga Community College, and they're going to be looking at developing inclusive integrated models of programming, including those in high-growth industries like manufacturing and health IT, and we're hoping that we'll be able to get some replicable models that will be useful to the rest of the system in the next several years. This is a 5-year project that's just kicking off. If we are going to expand access to transition services for the older group of kids, 18 to 25, we're going to have to start thinking about things a little bit more creatively. There are tools and approaches out there that we really haven't looked into very much in the disability community, one of them being apprenticeships. Apprenticeships are actually a job, and they are an integrated way of learning while you're on the job. Unfortunately, we know from research that we conducted both in 2007 and again in 2012 that people with disabilities generally are not included in apprenticeship opportunities, and I think that that's actually, I think we're missing the boat, and I think that the apprenticeship employers are missing the boat. We have a big opportunity. In 2008, the Department of Labor changed its regulations to allow for things like interim credentials, which can actually be a wonderful tool for getting young people with significant disabilities on the road to a career pathway. We're not using these things. There's a lot of money that is going into the system right now. President Obama has indicated that he wanted to increase the number of apprenticeships by 50% in the next 5 years, and given that is where things are going, I think it behooves us as a community to think about how we can use that opportunity to make more opportunities available to our young people. I think we also need to think about things like service learning. Service learning, there has been research that shows that if you're involved in a national service type activity, that you have a much larger likelihood of getting a job afterwards, even without a high school diploma. So there are things that we need to look at that we're not looking at now, and we need to think creatively.
Thank you very much. And Marlene, Michael, if you'd like to respond.
Yes. Well, it's very exciting to hear about David's vision. It's certainly not a vision I would have selected. Log cabins, not for me, but for David, that's, and the truck, I think that's wonderful. It's David's vision, and we all need to be able to see what we want in our lives and try to achieve those goals. I want to touch on a couple of points. First, I want to go back to the National Technical Assistance Center on Transition that I mentioned earlier, and to just kind of highlight for you that one of the key outcomes we're looking for in this center is that the center will help us increase the participation of students with disabilities in career-related curriculum that's designed to develop the knowledge and skills needed for success in competitive, integrated employment. And part of that is really focusing on work-based learning, including job shadowing, paid on-the-job training and internships, other kinds of structured career-related experiences. So we've really kind of taken the point that this center needs to kind of help the field figure out how to provide paid employment to students with disabilities. And if you remember, this is a collaboration between the Office of Special Education Programs and the Rehabilitation Services Administration. So we're looking at linking those systems at the federal level to kind of help link those systems at the state and local level. The other thing I want to talk about in terms of paid work and linking systems is about our Promise Initiative. It is the promoting readiness of minors in supplemental security income. I think Becky had touched on, we really don't want dependence on programs that kind of lead people into poverty and kind of keep them stuck there. And certainly, supplemental security income, SSI, is a very important benefit program. And I think we want to continue to support benefit programs like SSI. But we don't want them to be a barrier for people achieving their vision. And so our office has linked with the Department of Labor, HHS, Social Security Administration, to fund and administer 6 model demonstration projects that are actually a significant investment that will be looking at linking these systems and trying to help kids with disabilities and their families to be successful in achieving their post-school goals. And so I wanted to point out the states, because we funded 6 projects. Oh, here they are. There are 6 projects, one in Arkansas, California, Maryland, New York, Wisconsin, and then we have a consortium of states. It's one project that has 6 states, and those states are Utah, South Dakota, North Dakota, Montana, Colorado, and Arizona. These projects are a year into their implementation. They're actually recruiting participants for the model demonstration. So you may have heard, if you're in those states, you may have heard something about that. And what's key about that is we're requiring a paid work experience from those projects. That's a requirement of the models. In addition to that, before they could get this money, which really amounts for the whole investment, it's over $200 million. It's a huge investment. We required, before they could take this on, that the governor's office sign off on the application, basically saying, yeah, we're responsible for these state agencies and these programs within the state, and we're going to help do a model where these offices and agencies are collaborating. So those are just some of the things we're trying to get done and trying to do to move forward. And I think once we start getting results from these projects, hopefully that will be something we can learn from to diffuse throughout the entire system. So thanks.
Just briefly, I've actually had the opportunity to meet Becky and David and visit David's incredible program at Western Carolina University. And it really is unbelievable. The thing that struck me most, however, about the program is that it is centered on the philosophy of inclusion. And everything goes from there. The program was designed from that concept of inclusion, and you saw it every aspect of the program. So it really was fantastic. We know from research, right, that individuals with intellectual disabilities also benefit from post-secondary education. They're more likely to have jobs, they're more likely to have higher paying jobs, they're more likely to have checking accounts and credit cards, they're more likely to vote, they're more likely to participate in community services and volunteer, and they're more likely to have friends, more friends. So, we talk about inclusion. That's inclusion, right? The ability to meaningfully participate, fully participate in community lives. One other thing I just want to say, and I will wear this shirt proudly after I pay you for it, is again, WIOA, right? The Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act actually requires transition services for youth with disabilities between the ages of 14 and 24. So there's a great space here to really innovate. So,
Thank you so much. We're running just a little bit short on time, so we're going to try to ask maybe one really essential question. Yeah, Bob, are you ready?
You're ready, Bob? Okay. All right, this question is for Bob. What is your advice to advocates who want to tap into or increase the quality benefits counseling to families and people with disabilities to counteract the mythology they are surrounded by?
putting out a new solicitation for WIPAs later this year. Four things. First, we are putting out a new solicitation for WIPAs later this year. Second, we need to expand what we think of as benefits planning to stress things like resilience, health promotion, financial capability, to keep folks succeeding where it good jobs and careers that can lead to better self-supporting futures.
Bob, you did mention WIPA, and some may not be familiar with that acronym, including myself, so.
Work incentives, planning,
Okay, planning.
assistance,
Okay, great. Okay, so work incentive planning assistance. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so thank you.
Can I just say one thing?
Absolutely.
And it'll be a lovely segue, you'll see.
Okay.
Marlene talked about the Promise Grants, and one of the key components of the Promise Grants are, in fact, benefits counseling and engaging the families in benefits counseling, because these are families that are relying on SSI, not just the kid. So that's a really critical element of it, and working with the families, ensuring they understand how benefits work and the like. So
Okay,
with
thank
that,
you. Okay, thank you very much. We can make a wonderful segue into our final question. One thing I might mention before I begin, I was going to say it at the end. I probably should have said it at the beginning. This proceeding is being recorded. The plan is that Tash would develop a, I hope you knew that, is planning on developing a white paper, a monograph, some materials related to it. And one of the questions that I'll ask you later, we don't need to answer in person right now, is we have a lot of really good questions that we're not going to get to. And so I'm hoping we can do some follow-up to get written responses so we can sort of broaden the conversation even beyond what we've had the opportunity to do this morning. So with that, we're going to go ahead and move on to question number 3, a really critical question. How can we promote strategies to support parental expectations and engagement in college and career readiness? And Deborah Jennings is here with us. She is both with the New Jersey Parent Information Training Center as well as the newly funded Center for Parent Information and Resources. And I'm thrilled to have Deborah here with us to talk first about family engagement. So thank you.
Good morning, everyone. And I think the first thing I actually have to say is hashtag Black Lives Matter. I'm from the New York metropolitan area. And it's been a difficult few days. So I'm going to just talk to you really about the work that parent centers are doing around the country to support families, and particularly families with children in those transition ages. Parent centers are, when we're talking about family expectations, expectations really come from a vision. And having a vision means that you have to have something that tells you that this is something that you can accomplish. And one of the things I think that's really important about parent centers is that these are parent-led, family-led organizations who have gone through almost every possible struggle that a family can imagine and have gone through it and come through it successfully and can be the kinds of models that families can look at, have young people that young people can look at to help in terms of having those kinds of expectations that our young people need to have and our families need to have. We have, as parent centers, we have to know a lot about a lot. Like everything that this panel has said, everything that all of the people who have presented so far have said, everything that probably that is presented at this conference, that's information that parent centers need to have in order to support families through all of the various pathways and all of the various struggles that they go through. And so we have, through the Center for Parent Information and Resources, parentcenterhub.org, which we've established as a place where parent centers can come and get information that they can then share with families. It's interesting that I'm talking to you today because we just are completing our annual data collection, and parent centers have over this past year had over 1 million contacts with families, and that's through workshops. I mean, I'm saying, when I say contacts, I mean, real body-to-body contacts, and a lot of that is body-to-body contacts through workshops, the one-to-one conversations and coaching and information and support that parent centers are providing. And 25% has been serving transition age youth. So, I think that tells you that is an area where we're getting a lot of demand. And 30% are from culturally and linguistically diverse families. And so we don't really collect data on socioeconomic status, but there are 30 what are called community parent centers where they're focused and they're specifically funded to work in targeted and underserved communities and to provide really very intensive services, really almost at the level of case management in terms of really serving underserved families in some of the toughest, most difficult communities, rural as well as urban communities in our country. In order for families to have high expectations, they need information. And each year, we are empowering families as partners and advocates for improving outcomes, improving graduation, improving student achievement. I mean, we were given 14 sort of priority areas, and included in those areas are making sure that we understand college and career readiness, the standards, all the various assessments, and that we're able to share with families evidence-based practices. So that's why it's such a really broad number of topics that we have to know about, that we have to have access to resources for. We work a lot with the USDE-funded Technical Assistance Center. We sort of like translators. We help to take that information and put it into more family-friendly terms so people can access it. I think another thing you should know is that discipline is probably, if not the top request, it's number 2. Because our kids, and probably in that 24%, our kids are the kids who are also being suspended disproportionately. And when kids are out of school, they're not going to be successful. They're not going to be, especially as we're talking about standards and having those workplace opportunities. Those are the kinds of things that are taken away from kids because they're unfortunately being kept out of school for so much of the time. Something else interesting is that that parent centers themselves have a lot of online resources. There are approximately 100 parent centers across the country in every state, some states more than one, and a number of the territories. And almost every one of them, I think there was one that said they were in the process of working on their website. Almost every one has websites, YouTube stations, Facebook pages, reaching families through social media, reaching young people through social media. Website visits were over 7 million website visits, and that's across, that's across all of those areas. We know that families are accessing our information in a lot of different ways. It's almost 1 out of 3 of the workshops are being accessed online versus face-to-face. And I think that those numbers are going to continue to grow in terms of how families are getting that information. Families need information to be advocates, not only individually, but also systems advocates. And so what you will, as Barbara was talking earlier about the SSIP, there have to be family voices in those SSIPs. And it's through many of the parent centers that family voices are being collected and brought to the table. In our state, I'm in New Jersey, inclusion is a huge issue. And we're advocates, so we actually were parties to a suit in New Jersey in order to address inclusion and LRE. And we brought the evidence-based practices to the settlement that occurred last spring. And I just really want to talk about the newly funded centers that are going to be funded by RSA. And it's really about that collaboration across all of the different partners in the adult systems in order to develop youth leaders, self-advocacy, and also to make sure that families know what they need to know in order to be effective advocates and to be able to reach those expectations that they have for their young people. Thank you.
Okay, and last but not least, and I'm so glad we still have time, Eric Carter is here to speak with us about sort of current information and research around family engagement for employment. Thanks so much.
Sure. Good morning. So, the primary purpose of special education, why we send students to school for 22 years, is to equip them for a good life after high school. So I wanted to kind of begin with a provocative statement, maybe, but the most powerful force in changing those transition outcomes, it turns out, isn't our well-crafted transition plans. It's not the instruction we provide, the schooling we offer, or the systems we build. It turns out it's actually the expectations and the aspirations that parents hold for their sons and daughters with disabilities. And it's not that all of those other efforts are not important, but absent families who have a really clear and compelling vision for life after high school, for that good life, we're missing something really essential. And I know that statement doesn't surprise this audience, because we know that an organization like this was formed because of parents who held a different set of expectations than those that were prevailing around them. So that brings me to my role in the town hall, which is to share just a bit about the strong empirical support for something we know intuitively is so important. So in a recent study, my colleagues and I looked at a federally funded longitudinal study of 11,000 students with disabilities across the country. And what we're really interested in doing is looking at the school and family and community and student level factors that would predict post-school employment outcomes for young people with significant disabilities. So we looked at students who were eligible for the alternate assessment, and we looked at those factors during high school that would change the course of students' lives after high school. What predicts those post-school outcomes? And what we found was surprising to us, at least, because for young adults with significant disabilities whose parents expected them to obtain post-school work back when they were in high school, those students were 5 times more likely to find paid community-based jobs in the community with other people who didn't have similar labels. And when we put that in our larger model with other factors, those expectations still held out that those students were 3 times more likely to be working than students whose parents didn't have those expectations. What was surprising to us is parent expectations were more powerful than any student demographics, than any skills students possessed, and even any school programs or transition experiences we provided to students. So if you want to more than triple the odds that young people are going to work after high school, let's focus on the expectations and aspirations of parents much earlier on, long before graduation day. And we've done a study. We've got a systems change project going on in the state of Tennessee. It's a federally funded project, and we're also trying to figure out how do we shape those expectations from a very, very early age. We just finished up last month a 10-month study of more than 2,300 families across our state, asking them about their expectations and hopes for their children after they graduated from high school. What we found is that 80% of these parents expect their son or daughter to work part-time or full-time in the community for pay. Only about 2/3 of those families expect that's actually going to happen. So there's a gap between our aspirations and our expectations. But those expectations are more than triple than they are for sheltered or segregated experience among these families. And I share that because it means that we have to aim our services and our supports, the formal ones and the informal ones, at those expectations. So what does the research tell us about those expectations? 4 points and then 4 recommendations. The first is that expectations are formed early and over time. So if we wait until high school before we start casting and supporting a vision for post-school college, we've waited already too late. It's those early messages, the ones that come at diagnosis, that come throughout early elementary school, that become the course-shifting interventions that we do. And second, expectations shape experiences. The expectations parents hold influence the types of early exposure and experiences they provide to their sons or daughters. When they have certain post-school expectations in mind, they're more likely to require their child to do household responsibilities, they're more likely to have conversations about future careers, to involve their children in extracurricular and community activities, to advocate for rigorous learning opportunities, and to connect their child to early volunteer and apprenticeships and early work experiences. And all of that happens before 14 or 16 when transition planning starts. The third point is that experiences then also shape expectations, and that influence is really bidirectional. So when we involve students in general education courses, when we give them hands-on work experiences and we connect them to inclusive opportunities, that then changes what parents expect is possible for their sons or daughters, especially when they've had few examples of what it might look like after high school. And fourth, expectations are influenced by opportunities and supports. What happens as parents start to approach that post-school precipice is, and all they see is waiting lists or segregated options, their expectations start to dip. And the challenge we have is to elevate our services and supports so they meet high expectations, not require parents to lower those expectations to meet prevailing services and supports. So where does that leave us in terms of what we might do and what our recommendations are? So I want to leave you with 4 very modest suggestions for where we might invest our work. And the first has already been said. We've got to connect our families with ordinary examples of what's possible. Many families in our state have seen few examples of young people with significant disabilities going to college, going to work, or contributing in other ways in their community. So whether that's linking parents to families who are just a little further along the journey, whether it's showing them success stories of how other families have made it happen, all of those create new portraits of possibilities for our families. So in Tennessee, we're really investing in showing success stories of other Tennessee families who've made it work, and that's helping those families hear from other parents. I think the second thing we need to do is resource expectations. It strikes me as unethical to encourage parents to catch a vision and to pursue it with vigor, only to withhold the very services and supports they need to make that happen. And so I think an overarching theme of this town hall is we've got to resource transition well if we really believe that is the purpose of why we send kids to school for 21 or 22 years. The third point is that we've got to catch and communicate a collective vision. Parent aspirations are certainly powerful, but so are the expectations of educators, of employers, of service providers, of congregation members, community leaders, and youth themselves. And so we want to make sure our systems are designed so that young people with significant disabilities hear from multiple sources over time, that they have something of value to contribute within the workplace, and really something essential that their community is missing if they're not contributing to that community. And fourth, maybe the most important point, is I think we have to let parent expectations challenge our expectations. There's a tension here that I think we have to release as professionals, because so many times as professionals, we might be a little reluctant to really let parents hope large here, because it ultimately requires us to do things differently. It demands that we do something differently. So I think we have to find ways to let our families show us what's possible, especially when their vision exceeds our own. And in fact, my sense is, just watching TASH over the years, this is always how the field has moved forward the fastest. So thank you very much.
Really, really awesome. We are running a little bit short on time. We have about 5 minutes left, so I think it'd be really important to hear a response from the panel. We're saving all the questions. We do hope we can answer those in the future in writing and put something together that will meet our needs. So this maybe is open. Who'd like to start with responding to this issue?
I'll go quickly. I'll start quickly. I got 2 stories to tell, and they're very short, and neither of them have to do with transition, but they have to do with parents and expectations. One, and I'm reminded from Eric, I was down visiting the Susan Gray Center, which is an inclusive early learning center at Vanderbilt, and it's fantastic and it's fabulous. And I was talking to a parent of a young kid without a disability who participates in this inclusive early childhood program. And this mother said to me, they were out in the park the week before, and her child, her son, saw a kid across the park using a wheelchair. And her 3-year-old went running up to this other kid and said, I have a friend who uses a wheelchair too. And the mother of the kid in the wheelchair, just like the look on her face, like, so the benefits of inclusion just, are mushrooming. So that's my first story. My second story is also an early learning story. I was visiting a parent center out in Massachusetts, talking to a bunch of folks, talking to a bunch of parents, and there was a young woman whose child had pretty significant disabilities, and it was time for her kid to go to preschool. And she was in a suburb of Boston, pretty wealthy school district, high-performing school district, and it was time to go to preschool, and the school district said, we don't really know how to do this, but here's this great program over there. And she was like, no, that's not my expectation. My expectation is my kid's going to go to school with his neighbors and his friends in the community. And they're like, yeah, I get that. But, you know, we don't know how to do that really. And here's your kid's going to really be successful if they go to this program. And that just wasn't her expectation. So she worked with her parent center, got the resources to work with the school district, and she got an inclusive preschool for not only her kid, but for every kid that comes after that. And this mother said to me, I am an agent of change. And so I'll stop with that.
Thank you so much.
I'll be really quick. It's not a very, it's a rather harsh visual, but I've heard it stated that families and youth with disabilities experience what's known as a cliff effect, where well-laid plans for transition may have been developed but not achieved because those connections with post-school services are simply not made. And so I guess if some of you may be familiar that in 2012, GAO issued a report. It's titled, Better Federal Coordination Could Lessen Challenges in the Transition of Youth with Disabilities. So, okay. And so one of the recommendations was that they charged 4 federal agencies, HHS, Social Security Administration, Department of Labor, and ED, with coming up with methods to increase awareness among students, families, high school teachers, and other service providers on the range of available transition services. So that's one of many of a few recommendations that they made to us. And we basically have been working together with federal transition, interagency transition, working together on a federal interagency transition strategy. And part of it has been done through our Federal Partners in Transition work group, which really has about 12 agencies represented on it. So that's kind of an ongoing effort. And one last point I wanted to make was Deb Jennings is a key partner in our National Center on Systemic Improvement, the one that's the largest, one of the largest TA centers we've ever funded.
Thank you so much.
One of the areas where we have been looking, particularly given our new emphasis on looking at community colleges, are the supports available to families of youth with disabilities, young adults with disabilities in the post-secondary world, and there is not very much out there. So we want to start remedying that situation, and one of the ways we'd like to do that is we're partnering with PACER to conduct a national dialogue that is going to focus on what supports are needed once students reach young adulthood. For a 2-week period that's going to start in mid to late January, we're going to conduct the dialogue to hear your thoughts and feelings of families about what post-secondary institutions and other providers could do to better assist them in supporting their young person in attaining post-secondary education and employment success. We know that for all youth, families continue to play a really important role, more and for a longer period of time, whether a young person has a disability or not. And we know that there are few, if any, supports currently out there. We are interested in hearing from family members who have kids currently involved in some sort of post-secondary program. And we're not talking about just colleges, we're talking about apprenticeship certificate programs, or if they have had a child involved in the past. We're going to use this information to develop materials to assist the post-secondary institutions in doing a better job of supporting their families as they help to support their young adult in becoming self-sufficient. Thank you.
Thank you. Bob?
Before we turn it over to Bob, I just want to say one thing, because I want to make sure that I say it, and that is Deb mentioned it, and so you're aware of it, is we have funded for the first time in a few years parent centers through our Rehab Services Administration. So you may not be aware of it because it's the first time in a number of years. So just be aware of it and talk to Deb if you got any questions.
Great.
We are in DC, so I am going to filibuster a bit. As I said earlier, my own experiences and that of others I know convince me that it really comes down to how parents view and react to the tensions between possibility, opportunity, and risk. Or what a friend and mentor to many of us, Bob Persk, describes as the dignity of risk. Some of you might have heard a story that NPR ran a few weeks back, which ostensibly was about how to motivate or nudge people to make a difference by contributing a small amount of money to end world hunger. And what the researchers found was not surprising. When people were barraged with reams of dismal data on the scope, devastation, and seemingly immutable trajectory of worldwide hunger, most felt powerless and paralyzed, completely crippled, to be purposefully blunt about it, and they reported feeling any contribution they made would be meaningless and zero impact. In contrast, when study participants were told stories about how small donors were making the lives of children and entire communities, most were but more likely to contribute and to believe they were making a difference. For me, what the real story behind the story goes back to the importance of developing good choice architecture that, like universal design of the physical environment, technology, and in the classroom, I see as essential too, searing away the clutter, complexities, the fear, and the seemingly impenetrable barriers that prevents many youth and young adults with disabilities and their parents from, number one, recognizing that getting a good high school and college education and gaining and sustaining a good job and career, while difficult to do, is within reach. And number two, that working to achieve, sustain, and build out such success is both important and the responsible thing to do. Right now, the dominant choice architecture that we all, I believe, share some complicity in is driven by three things: confusion, complexity, and dread. When was the last time a day or week go by without you hearing or perhaps saying to another person things like, the vast majority of people with disabilities do not work and cannot find a job even when they want one, that Social Security work incentives are incomprehensible and make it impossible to work, or that if you are working and receiving SSI or SSDI, you should work for less and for fewer hours than you are capable of doing. That 110% of all workers with intellectual and developmental disabilities can only work 10 to 20 hours a week, and stopping benefits to earn a better living in a good job is likewise a foolish idea. 1000% of the time as well. I am not saying there is not some truth in at least some of these statements, or that we should sugarcoat the harsh reality they convey. But I am saying that I fear most parents and young people who hear and have these types of messages incessantly driven into them over the years are naturally very risk-averse and take them as the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but truth, when in fact it is not. Over the years, many people with significant disabilities, including intellectual and developmental disabilities, have moved beyond poverty by becoming and staying employed. Many have been able to receive benefits by earning a living instead. Some are struggling in low-wage jobs, but others are making it. The point is we know little and invest little in understanding and improving the career path, employment, and economic well-being of these workers who are putting it on the line to do everything we preach. And until we do this, bending the curve just is not going to happen. I went to college and started my career largely because in the 70s my parents and I knew young adults with significant disabilities who were somewhat older and were creating lives and futures which I wanted to make my own. That made a crucial difference for both my parents and me.
Thank you. Thank you. I can't thank you enough, the federal panel, all the presenters. It was really awesome. Those of you in the audience who asked really good, hard questions. So I appreciate your time and staying over a little bit. Thanks again. Have a great rest of your TASH. There is one more town hall this afternoon on independence. Oh, employment. Oh, I thought employment was yesterday. Okay, great. Employment.